Welcome to the audiobook of Happy Hours, a gripping billionaire office romance with a twist of mystery, written by USA Today best-selling author Shelfie Bennett. This captivating story, inspired by the timeless storytelling of Agatha Christie, weaves suspense, romance, and high-stakes drama into a tale that will keep you on the edge of your seat. Brought to life by Shelfie Audiobook, this production is a seamless blend of riveting narration and heart-pounding storytelling. So, settle in and let the secrets of Happy Hours unfold. Because in this world, nothing is what it seems, and every hour is a chance for love. Charlie awoke the next morning with a mixture of excitement and dread. The events of the previous night replayed in her mind like a film on a loop, the intensity of Oliver's confession, the heat of their kiss, and the unspoken promise hanging in the air when she left his office. What had she done? Her rational mind screamed at her to draw a line, to keep things professional, but her heart and body betrayed her. There was no denying the pull she felt toward him, a magnetic force that refused to let her go. As she walked into the office, the usual hum of activity felt sharper, more pointed. She half expected whispers to follow her down the hall, but no one seemed to know what had transpired. For now. She was at her desk, reviewing the quarterly reports Oliver had requested, when Alyssa appeared with 2 steaming cups of coffee. "Morning, workaholic," Alyssa chirped, sliding a cup toward Charlie. "Thanks," Charlie said, forcing a smile. "You look different today," Alyssa said, narrowing her eyes. "Did something happen?" "Not really," Charlie replied too quickly, ducking her head. "Aha," Alyssa said, her tone dripping with skepticism. "You can't fool me, Morgan." "Spill." "Nothing to spill," Charlie said firmly, taking a sip of her coffee. Alyssa sighed dramatically. "Fine. Be mysterious. But when you crack, and you will crack, I want details." With that, Alyssa sauntered off, leaving Charlie to her racing thoughts. The day passed in a blur, but by late afternoon, something happened that snapped Charlie out of her haze. A courier arrived at her desk, carrying a small package wrapped in plain brown paper. "This is for you," he said, handing it over. "For me?" Charlie asked, frowning. The courier nodded. Delivery instructions were specific: hand-deliver to Charlie Morgan. "That's you, right?" "Yes, that's me," she said, accepting the package. Her heart thudded as she examined it. There was no sender information, just her name written in neat, blocky letters. She glanced around, but no one seemed to be paying attention. Curiosity burned as she carefully tore open the paper. Inside was a single item, a sleek black USB drive. She stared at it, her pulse quickening. Who had sent this? And why? Her desk phone buzzed, making her jump. "Charlie, can you come to my office?" Oliver's voice came through the line, steady and commanding. "On my way," she replied, her voice tight. She tucked the USB drive into her bag, deciding to deal with it later. Oliver's office was bathed in the warm glow of the setting sun, but his expression was anything but serene. He stood by the window, his phone in one hand and a folder in the other. "Close the door," he said without turning around. Charlie obeyed, a sense of déjà vu washing over her. "What's going on?" she asked. Oliver finally turned, his face etched with tension. "I need your input on this proposal before I send it to the board," he said, handing her the folder. The businesslike tone caught her off guard, but she quickly adjusted. "Of course." As they reviewed the documents, the air between them felt taut, as though both of them were avoiding the elephant in the room. Finally, unable to bear the silence any longer, Charlie spoke. "About last night." "Don't," Oliver interrupted, his tone firm but not unkind. "Not here. Not now." Her cheeks burned. "Right. Of course. I'm not ignoring it, Charlie," he said, softening. "But there's too much at stake to let it distract us right now." She nodded, though the dismissal stung. Later that evening, back at her apartment, Charlie finally allowed herself to examine the USB drive. Her hands shook as she plugged it into her laptop, her heart pounding with anticipation and dread. The drive contained a single folder labeled, "Night and Enterprise Confidential." She clicked it open, her breath catching as she scanned the contents. There were dozens of files, emails, financial reports, contracts, all tied to Oliver's company. One email, in particular, caught her attention. From Anonymous to Internal Team. Subject: Knight Enterprises Takeover Strategy. Details of the acquisition are underway. Knight's vulnerabilities will be exploited to ensure compliance. No leaks tolerated. Charlie's blood ran cold. Someone was targeting Oliver, and this information could destroy him. But who had sent it to her? And why? Her phone buzzed on the table, making her jump. It was a text from an unknown number. Unknown, did you get the package? Charlie's heart raced. Charlie, who is this? The response came almost immediately. Unknown, someone who knows what's coming. Be careful. The message disappeared before she could reply, leaving her staring at her phone in stunned silence. Her hands trembled as she stared at the USB drive, the implications of what she'd uncovered sinking in. She was no longer just an employee, or even a woman caught in a whirlwind romance. She was now part of something far bigger and far more dangerous than she had ever imagined. Charlie sat in her apartment, staring at the USB drive as though it might explode. The files were damning. If even half of what she'd read was true, Oliver was at the center of a corporate storm, one that could ruin him if it wasn't stopped. Her instincts warred within her. Should she confront him? What if he already knew? What if he was hiding more than she imagined? The anonymous messages didn't help. Whoever had sent her the package had an agenda, but whether they were an ally or a foe was unclear. Her phone buzzed again. This time, the text was chilling. Unknown, you're in over your head. Charlie's stomach churned. She glanced around her apartment, suddenly paranoid that someone might be watching her. She shut her laptop and pocketed the USB drive. Whatever was happening, she couldn't sit here and wait for answers to fall into her lap. There was only one person who could give her the truth, and he was sitting in his office. Charlie arrived at the building well after hours. The halls were dimly lit, the usual bustle of the office replaced by an eerie silence. Oliver's office door was ajar, and a faint light spilled into the hallway. She hesitated before stepping inside. Charlie, Oliver's voice called from the shadows. Her breath caught as he appeared, stepping into the light. His tie was gone, his shirt unbuttoned at the collar, and his expression was unreadable. "What are you doing here so late?" he asked, his voice calm but tinged with curiosity. "I need to talk to you," she said, clutching the USB drive in her pocket. "And I think you know why." His brows furrowed. "Do I?" "Stop pretending, Oliver," she said, her voice shaking. "Someone sent me this." She pulled the USB drive from her pocket and placed it on his desk. His expression darkened as he picked it up. "What's on it?" he asked, his voice low. "Emails, financial records, contracts, all tied to you and Knight Enterprises," she said. "And a message about a takeover. Someone is targeting you, and they sent this to me as a warning." Oliver's jaw tightened, and he set the drive down without plugging it in. "Who sent it to you?" "I don't know," Charlie said. "But they've been texting me too. They're watching us, Oliver." "Watching you?" He let out a heavy breath, his shoulders tense. "I told you this wouldn't be easy. There are people, powerful people, who would do anything to see me fall. This isn't new to me, Charlie." "Then why didn't you warn me?" she demanded. "Why did you drag me into this without telling me the risks?" "I didn't drag you into anything," Oliver said sharply. "You earned your place here. But I didn't expect them to target you so quickly." "Who are they?" Charlie asked, stepping closer. "And why are they after you?" Oliver hesitated, his expression conflicted. Then, as though making a decision, he motioned for her to sit. "You deserve the truth," he said, his voice quieter now. Oliver leaned against the edge of his desk, his eyes fixed on hers. "Years ago, when I was first building Knight Enterprises, I made enemies. I was young, ambitious, and willing to take risks that most wouldn't. Some of those risks paid off. Others left scars." "Scars?" Charlie asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "There were deals I had to walk away from," he continued. "Deals that would have tied me to people with questionable ethics. But walking away came at a price. They lost money, power, and influence because of me, and they've been waiting for their chance to strike back ever since." "And now they're trying to take you down," Charlie said. Oliver nodded. "The takeover they're planning? It's not just about the company. It's personal. They want to destroy everything I've built, my reputation, my legacy. And now they're using you to do it." "Me?" Charlie asked, startled. "You're my Achilles heel," Oliver said, his gaze intense. "They see how close we've gotten, and they think they can use you to hurt me." Charlie's stomach churned. "So what do we do?" "We don't play their game," Oliver said firmly. "Whoever sent you that drive wants you to panic, to question me, to sow distrust between us. But we can't let them win. Charlie's mind raced. What if there's more? What if this is just the beginning? It probably is, Oliver admitted. But I'm not going to let them hurt you, Charlie. I'll handle this. No, she said, standing. We'll handle this. Together. He stared at her, his expression softening. You don't have to do this. Yes, I do, she said, her voice steady. I'm already in this, Oliver. And I'm not going to let them tear us apart. For a moment, he said nothing. Then, with a nod, he reached for her hand. Okay. Together. Charlie felt a surge of determination as their fingers intertwined. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew one thing for sure: she wasn't going to let anyone, or anything, destroy what they'd started to build. But as she left his office that night, the lingering question in her mind remained. Who was pulling the strings behind the scenes? And how far were they willing to go to win? She didn't have the answers yet, but one thing was clear: this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Charlie didn't sleep much that night. Every time she closed her eyes, her thoughts swirled with images of the USB drive, Oliver's tense expression, and the cryptic warnings from the unknown sender. She had agreed to stand by Oliver's side, but the weight of what they were up against pressed heavily on her. The next morning, she arrived at the office determined to find answers. If she was going to fight this battle, she needed to understand who they were up against, and what they were capable of. By lunchtime, her head was spinning. She had spent hours reviewing internal reports, employee records, and any information she could access without raising suspicion. There was nothing blatantly incriminating, but there were patterns, small discrepancies in the financials, unusual account transfers, and a few terminated contracts that had never been publicly disclosed. One name appeared more than once: Dominic Fraser. She recognized it immediately. Fraser was a ruthless competitor, a man who had a reputation for playing dirty in the corporate world. He had crossed paths with Oliver years ago during a high-stakes merger, and the fallout had been brutal. Oliver had walked away the victor, but it seemed Fraser wasn't finished seeking revenge. Dominic Fraser, Charlie muttered to herself, scrolling through the records on her screen. The name was linked to shell companies, private equity groups, and suspicious transactions, all pointing to a concerted effort to destabilize Knight Enterprises. Her stomach churned. Fraser wasn't just trying to win a corporate war, he was orchestrating a full-scale takedown. At precisely 2 p.m., Charlie's phone buzzed with a message from Oliver. Meeting in 10. My office. She gathered her notes and headed upstairs, her pulse quickening as she neared his office. The door was closed, and she could hear voices inside. She paused, hesitant to interrupt. I don't care what it costs, Oliver's voice said, low and sharp. Make it happen. A muffled response followed, too faint for Charlie to make out, and then the sound of footsteps. She stepped back just as the door opened and a man in a tailored suit strode past her without so much as a glance. His face was unfamiliar, but his presence radiated authority and danger. Charlie, Oliver said, spotting her. Come in. She entered, closing the door behind her. The tension in the room was palpable, and Oliver's expression was a mask of focus and control. Who was that? She asked, unable to hide her curiosity. A consultant, Oliver said, brushing off the question. We're taking precautions to protect the company. And to protect you? Charlie pressed. Oliver's jaw tightened. I can handle myself. She took a seat across from him, setting her notes on the desk. I've been digging into the records, and one name keeps coming up: Dominic Fraser. Oliver's eyes darkened. Of course it's Fraser. So it's true, she said. He's the one behind all of this? Most likely, Oliver said, leaning back in his chair. Fraser's been waiting for an opportunity to come after me. I didn't think he'd stoop this low, but I shouldn't be surprised. What happened between you two? Charlie asked. Oliver hesitated, his expression unreadable. Then he let out a heavy sigh. Years ago, Fraser and I were bidding on the same company. It was a small tech firm with big potential. Fraser thought he had it in the bag, but I outmaneuvered him. I exposed his backdoor dealings to the board, and they chose me. You exposed him? Charlie asked, her eyes widening. I did what I had to do, Oliver said. But Fraser lost more than the deal. He lost credibility, investors, and millions of dollars. He blames me for his downfall, and he spent the past 5 years trying to claw his way back to the top. And now he wants to destroy you, Charlie said. Oliver nodded. He doesn't just want to win. He wants revenge. That evening, Charlie was working late when her email pinged with a message from an anonymous sender. Subject: You don't know everything. Attached was a single file labeled Knight Fraser Connection PDF. She hesitated, her cursor hovering over the attachment. Every instinct told her to ignore it, but curiosity, and the nagging sense that she was missing a crucial piece of the puzzle, won out. The file was a dossier, meticulously compiled, detailing Oliver's business dealings. At first glance, it seemed straightforward: contracts, acquisitions, and financial records. But the deeper she looked, the more unsettling the connections became. There were whispers of off-the-books transactions and partnerships that didn't line up. One in particular stood out: an old deal between Knight Enterprises and a company tied to Fraser himself. Her heart sank as the implications hit her. Was it possible that Oliver and Fraser had once worked together? And if so, what had gone wrong? Her phone buzzed, jolting her out of her thoughts. Unknown, did you see it? Now you understand. Her hands trembled as she typed back. Charlie, who are you? Why are you sending me this? The reply was instant. Unknown, someone who knows the truth. Be careful, Charlie. You're in dangerous waters. As the message disappeared, Charlie's mind raced. The evidence was damning, but she couldn't reconcile it with the man she knew. If Oliver had a past connection to Fraser, why hadn't he told her? What else was he hiding? And more importantly, how far was she willing to go to uncover the truth? She stared at the dossier on her screen, a sinking feeling settling in her chest. The game of lies was only beginning, and she was already in too deep. The next morning, the weight of the previous night's conversation lingered over Charlie like a storm cloud. She couldn't shake the gravity of what Oliver had revealed, or the intensity of the unspoken promises they'd exchanged. As much as she wanted to trust him, the stakes were too high to rely on blind faith. Charlie resolved to take matters into her own hands. If Fraser was orchestrating this takedown, she needed leverage, something to counter his every move. At her desk, she began digging through the company's communication archives. It was risky, she was venturing into territory that could cost her job if anyone found out, but desperation pushed her forward. She focused on recent acquisitions and partnerships, scanning for any anomalies that might hint at Fraser's involvement. Hours ticked by, her screen glowing with spreadsheets, email chains, and board meeting transcripts. Finally, she found it, a transaction buried deep in a subsidiary's records. Entity: Oak Ridge Capital, Dominic Fraser's known alias. Amount: $15 million. Purpose: consulting services. Consulting services, she muttered, her stomach twisting. Oak Ridge Capital had funneled millions into one of Knight Enterprises' regional offices. The dates lined up with the timing of the anonymous messages and the escalating attacks on Oliver's reputation. The betrayal wasn't just external, it was coming from inside the company. Armed with this knowledge, Charlie marched to Oliver's office. The determination in her step must have been evident, because his assistant barely blinked as Charlie strode past her desk and into his private suite. Charlie, Oliver said, startled as she closed the door behind her. What's going on? She dropped a printed copy of the transaction on his desk. This. Oak Ridge Capital. Fraser's using one of your subsidiaries to funnel money into the company and undermine you from the inside. Oliver's face darkened as he scanned the document. His usual air of control cracked, anger simmering just below the surface. I had my suspicions, he said, his voice low. But this confirms it. Someone on your team is working with him, Charlie said. And they're using your own infrastructure to do it. Oliver leaned back in his chair, rubbing a hand across his jaw. This explains why the attacks have been so precise. Fraser isn't just guessing, he's getting real-time information. From someone in your inner circle, Charlie added. The realization hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. For a moment, neither of them spoke. We need to find out who it is, Oliver said finally, his voice hard. And when we do, we'll cut them off at the knees. Charlie hesitated. Oliver, this might sound crazy, but what if we turn the tables? Use Fraser's mole against him. Oliver raised an eyebrow. You want to feed them false information? Exactly, she said, her mind racing. If we give them just enough to act on, we can expose Fraser's hand without tipping him off. A slow smile spread across Oliver's face, sharp and dangerous. I like the way you think. That evening, The plan began to take shape. Together, they crafted a set of fake documents, details of a supposed merger that would signal a massive strategic shift for Knight Enterprises. The information was convincing but riddled with subtle traps, each designed to reveal who was leaking it. Once the files were complete, Oliver handed them to Charlie. "You're sure you're okay with this?" She nodded. "This is the best way to get the truth." Their gazes locked, a silent understanding passing between them. For all the uncertainty and danger, they were in this together. The next few days were a waiting game. Charlie worked her usual hours, keeping an eye on the fake documents and tracking any unusual activity. The tension in the office was palpable, with whispers of corporate restructuring spreading like wildfire. She stayed vigilant, watching for signs of who might take the bait. By Friday afternoon, the trap was sprung. The document had been accessed from an executive's account, Mark Calloway, the regional director of the subsidiary tied to Oak Ridge Capital. Charlie immediately alerted Oliver, her heart racing as she watched him absorb the news. "Calloway," Oliver said, his tone cold. "I should have known. Do you want me to confront him?" Charlie asked. "No," Oliver said firmly. "I'll handle this. But I need you to stay close. If Calloway realizes we're onto him, he could try to shift the blame, or worse, disappear." That night, Oliver called an emergency meeting with the board, summoning Calloway to explain the transaction. Charlie watched from the sidelines as the confrontation unfolded, her pulse pounding with every word. $15 million, Oliver said, his voice calm but lethal. "Care to explain how that ended up in a shell company owned by Dominic Fraser?" Calloway shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "It was a consulting fee, an oversight. I didn't realize." "Don't lie to me," Oliver snapped, his voice echoing through the room. "You've been feeding Fraser information for months, sabotaging my company from within. Did you really think I wouldn't find out?" Calloway's face paled, and for a moment, Charlie thought he might bolt. But Oliver leaned forward, his eyes like steel. "Here's what's going to happen," Oliver said. "You're going to resign, effective immediately. And if you so much as breathe a word to Fraser, I'll make sure you regret it." Calloway opened his mouth to protest, but the weight of Oliver's authority silenced him. Within the hour, Calloway was gone. As the boardroom emptied, Charlie lingered, her adrenaline still high. Oliver approached her, his expression softer now. "We did it," he said, his voice quiet. "For now," Charlie said. "But Fraser's not going to stop." "No," Oliver agreed. "But neither are we." Their gazes met, and for a moment, the world around them faded. The war was far from over, but together, they were ready to face whatever came next. Little did they know, the most dangerous move on the chessboard was still to come, and it wasn't theirs to make. Charlie woke the next morning feeling a mix of exhilaration and unease. They had unmasked one of Fraser's moles, but the fight was far from over. The look on Calloway's face as he was escorted out of the building haunted her. He had seemed cornered but not defeated, as if he had one more card left to play. Her thoughts drifted to Oliver. His intensity, his drive to protect what he'd built, and the fire in his eyes when they were strategizing together, all of it left her feeling more connected to him than ever. But beneath that connection lurked doubt. How much more was he hiding? Could she truly trust him when his secrets had nearly destroyed them both? By mid-morning, the fallout from Calloway's ousting was already rippling through the company. Employees whispered in hushed tones, speculating about the reason for his sudden departure. Charlie kept her head down, focused on the tasks in front of her. She was scanning through yet another report when her phone buzzed. It was a message from Oliver. "Oliver, come to my office. Now." She grabbed her tablet and hurried upstairs. His assistant wasn't at her desk, which struck Charlie as unusual, but she didn't have time to dwell on it. She knocked on Oliver's door and stepped inside when he called her in. Oliver was standing by the window, his silhouette sharp against the Manhattan skyline. His suit jacket hung over the back of his chair, and his sleeves were rolled up, revealing strong forearms. The tension in the room was palpable. "Close the door," he said without turning around. Charlie did as he asked, her heart pounding. "What's going on?" Oliver turned, his expression grim. "We have a problem." He handed her a folder. Inside was a series of screenshots, emails, meeting schedules, and transaction records. "This is from Calloway's personal server," Oliver explained. "It was sent to me anonymously this morning." Charlie's breath caught as she scanned the documents. They painted a damning picture, not just of Calloway, but of someone else inside the company who had been working with him. "Who is this?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Oliver hesitated, his jaw tightening. "Mark Hastings. He's been with the company for years, a senior advisor I thought I could trust." Charlie's stomach sank. Hastings was a fixture in the office, respected and admired by many. If he was involved, the conspiracy ran deeper than they'd thought. "What do we do?" she asked. "We confront him," Oliver said, his voice like steel. "But carefully. If we tip our hand too soon, he could destroy critical evidence, or worse, feed it straight to Fraser." Charlie nodded, her mind already racing. "What's the plan?" "We need leverage," Oliver said. "Something that forces him to cooperate." Charlie thought for a moment. "What about the anonymous sender? Whoever's helping us clearly knows a lot. If we can connect with them." "They're playing their own game," Oliver interrupted. "We can't trust them." "But we don't have another choice," Charlie argued. "If they have this much access, they could help us take down Hastings and Fraser in one move." Oliver's eyes met hers, a flicker of doubt crossing his face. "You're willing to risk it?" Charlie straightened her shoulders. "If it means stopping Fraser, yes." By late afternoon, Charlie was back at her desk, drafting a carefully worded response to the anonymous sender. She explained the situation with Hastings and asked for their help. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard before she hit send, the weight of the decision pressing on her. She didn't have to wait long for a reply. "Unknown, meet me tonight. 9 p.m. The Velvet Room." Charlie's heart raced. She forwarded the message to Oliver, who responded almost immediately. "Oliver, I'll be there. Stay close to me." The hours dragged by as Charlie prepared herself for the meeting. She didn't know who would show up, or whether they could be trusted. But as night fell, she found herself back at the Velvet Room, the bar's moody lighting and familiar jazz music doing little to calm her nerves. Oliver arrived moments later, his presence commanding as always. He placed a hand on her back, guiding her to a secluded booth in the corner. "Stay sharp," he murmured. "This could be a trap." Charlie nodded, her pulse quickening as they waited. At precisely 9 p.m., a man in a gray suit entered the bar. He scanned the room before making his way toward their booth. Charlie's breath caught as he approached. He was tall, with an air of confidence that bordered on arrogance. "You must be the power couple," the man said, sliding into the booth without invitation. "Who are you?" Oliver demanded, his tone cold. The man smirked. "Call me Alex. Let's just say I have a vested interest in seeing Fraser lose." "Why?" Charlie asked, her voice steady despite the pounding of her heart. "Fraser burned me," Alex said simply. "He used me as a pawn, just like he's using Hastings now. I want payback, and you're my best shot." Oliver's eyes narrowed. "And what's in it for you?" "Closure," Alex said, his smirk fading. "And maybe a little redemption." He slid a USB drive across the table. "This contains everything you need to take down Hastings and sever his connection to Fraser. But if you're going to make your move, you need to do it fast. Fraser's already lining up his next attack." Oliver hesitated, his hand hovering over the drive. "How do we know this isn't a setup?" "You don't," Alex said with a shrug. "But if you don't act, you'll lose more than just your company." Charlie glanced at Oliver, her instinct screaming that this was their only chance. "We have to trust him," she said. After a tense moment, Oliver picked up the drive. "If you're lying to me." "I'm not," Alex said, cutting him off. "But don't waste time. The clock's ticking." He stood and walked away, leaving Charlie and Oliver alone in the booth, the weight of the USB drive between them. As they left the bar, Charlie turned to Oliver. "What now?" "Now," he said, his voice resolute, "we finish this." But as they drove away, Charlie couldn't shake the feeling that Alex had left out something important, and that the next move in this dangerous game might cost them more than they were ready to lose. By the time Charlie arrived at the office the next morning, the weight of the USB drive felt like a stone in her pocket. The night had been sleepless, her mind replaying Alex's cryptic warnings and the look on Oliver's face when he had taken the drive. This was the moment everything came to a head. There was no room for hesitation anymore. Oliver was already in his office when she entered. The blinds were closed, casting shadows across his desk. He sat behind it, the USB drive plugged into his laptop, his face illuminated by the glow of the screen. "Anything?" Charlie asked, stepping inside and closing the door behind her. Oliver didn't look up. It's all here, he said grimly. Emails, financial records, even call logs. Hastings has been funneling information to Fraser for months. And he's been planning something big. Charlie's stomach tightened. What kind of something? A hostile takeover, Oliver said, leaning back in his chair. Hastings has been leaking proprietary data to Fraser, trade secrets, financial forecasts, the works. Fraser's using it to destabilize us from the inside and drive down our stock value. Once it's low enough, he'll swoop in and buy up controlling shares. Charlie's pulse quickened. How do we stop it? We expose him, Oliver said, his voice firm. Publicly. We use the evidence on this drive to discredit Hastings and sever his connection to Fraser. But it has to be airtight, no room for doubt or spin. Charlie nodded. So what's the plan? Oliver tapped a few keys on his laptop, bringing up a list of board members and stakeholders. We call an emergency meeting. Hastings will be there, and so will Fraser's representatives. Once they're all in the same room, we lay it all out. Her eyes widened. You're going to confront them directly? It's the only way, Oliver said. If we don't act now, Fraser will win. The hours leading up to the meeting were a blur of preparation. Charlie worked alongside Oliver, piecing together a detailed presentation that left no room for doubt. They rehearsed every detail, anticipating every possible rebuttal. By the time the meeting began, the tension in the boardroom was palpable. The senior executives were seated around the long table, their expressions a mix of curiosity and unease. Hastings sat near the middle, his face calm but his eyes sharp. Thank you all for coming on such short notice, Oliver began, standing at the head of the table. What we're about to discuss is of the utmost importance to this company's future. Charlie stood at his side, her hands clasped tightly as Oliver launched into the presentation. Slide by slide, he laid out the evidence, Hastings's connections to Oak Ridge Capital, the leaked information, and Fraser's role in the attempted takeover. The room fell into stunned silence. This is absurd, Hastings said finally, his voice steady but his face pale. You're accusing me of treason based on circumstantial evidence? This isn't circumstantial, Oliver shot back, his tone ice-cold. The records speak for themselves. And unless you'd like to explain why your personal account was used to transfer funds to Fraser's shell company, I suggest you remain silent. Hastings's jaw clenched, and for a moment, Charlie thought he might try to deny it. But then his composure cracked. You don't understand, Hastings said, his voice rising. Fraser gave me no choice. He threatened my family, my reputation. If I didn't cooperate, he would have ruined me. You ruined yourself, Oliver said, his voice hard. And you jeopardized this company in the process. Hastings slumped back in his chair, defeated. The board members murmured among themselves, their shock giving way to anger. What about Fraser? One of them asked. How do we stop him? Oliver nodded to Charlie, who stepped forward and handed out copies of the compiled evidence. We'll release this to the authorities and the media, she said. It's enough to discredit Fraser and block any further attempts at a takeover. One of the executives frowned. And what happens to Hastings? That decision is yours, Oliver said, his gaze sweeping the room. But as far as I'm concerned, he no longer has a place here. Hastings didn't protest. He simply rose from his seat, his shoulders slumped, and left the room without a word. The meeting ended with a unanimous vote to implement Oliver's plan. As the board members filed out, Oliver and Charlie lingered in the empty room, the weight of the moment settling over them. It's over, Charlie said, her voice quiet. Not yet, Oliver replied. Fraser won't give up that easily. But this buys us time. She looked at him, her chest tightening. Do you think we'll ever be free of this? Oliver reached for her hand, his grip firm and steady. I don't know. But as long as we're in this together, I'll fight for it. Charlie nodded, her resolve hardening. Me too. But as they left the boardroom, Charlie couldn't shake the feeling that the battle wasn't over. Somewhere out there, Fraser was regrouping, and his next move would be the most dangerous yet. The aftermath of the emergency meeting unfolded in a whirlwind. The board's decision to release the evidence and cut ties with Hastings sent shockwaves through Knight Enterprises. Within hours, news outlets picked up the story, branding Dominic Fraser as a corporate villain and tarnishing his reputation. But Charlie and Oliver knew better than to celebrate too soon. Fraser wasn't the type to go down quietly. By mid-morning, Oliver's office was a hub of activity. Phones rang incessantly, emails poured in, and reporters camped outside the building, hungry for statements. Charlie worked alongside him, coordinating damage control and keeping the team focused on stabilizing the company. Despite the chaos, an undercurrent of relief swept through the air. For the first time in weeks, it felt like they were regaining control. "Here," Oliver said, handing Charlie a coffee as they paused for a moment's reprieve. She took it with a small smile. "Thanks. I think I forgot what caffeine tastes like." "You've earned it," he said, his expression softening. "None of this would have been possible without you." "Don't give me too much credit," Charlie said. "I'm still trying to process everything." Oliver's gaze lingered on her, and for a moment, the noise around them faded. "We'll get through this," he said. "Together." Charlie nodded, her resolve solidifying. Whatever came next, she knew they could handle it. By late afternoon, the first major victory arrived. An internal memo confirmed that Knight Enterprises stock had stabilized, quelling fears of a market freefall. The board, once riddled with doubts, expressed their renewed confidence in Oliver's leadership. But just as things seemed to settle, a call came through that sent a chill down Charlie's spine. "It's Fraser," Oliver said, putting the phone on speaker. "Knight," Fraser's voice drawled, smooth and calculated. "Congratulations on your little exposé. I didn't think you had it in you." "You underestimated me," Oliver said coldly. "I did," Fraser admitted. "But you haven't won yet. You think tarnishing my name will stop me? You're sorely mistaken." "This isn't a game, Fraser," Oliver said. "Your days of manipulating and sabotaging are over." A low chuckle came through the line. "You're naive if you think this is over. I have resources you can't even imagine. And if you think your little protégé there is safe, think again." Charlie's blood ran cold. "Leave me out of this," she said, her voice steady despite the fear creeping in. "Too late for that," Fraser said. "You're in it now. And when the dust settles, you'll see how little loyalty Knight has to offer." The line went dead, leaving silence in its wake. Charlie stared at Oliver, her heart pounding. "He's bluffing, right?" Oliver's jaw tightened. "Fraser doesn't bluff." She sank into a chair, her mind racing. What does he mean by resources? What else could he have? "I don't know," Oliver admitted. "But we can't let him rattle us. We've already exposed him. He's grasping at straws." Charlie wanted to believe him, but the memory of Fraser's voice, the calm, almost amused tone, lingered in her mind. The days that followed were tense but manageable. Knight Enterprises held firm, bolstered by the outpouring of support from loyal stakeholders. Fraser's empire began to crumble under the weight of public scrutiny, and whispers of investigations into his dealings grew louder. But beneath the surface, a different kind of battle waged. Charlie found herself growing closer to Oliver, their bond strengthened by the trials they had endured together. Late nights in his office blurred the lines between professional and personal, each stolen glance and lingering touch adding fuel to the fire that had ignited between them. "Do you ever think about what comes next?" Charlie asked one evening as they worked side by side. Oliver looked up from his laptop, his expression thoughtful. "Every day. But I'm more interested in what's happening now." She smiled, the warmth in his gaze melting her lingering doubts. "What's happening now?" He leaned closer, his voice low. "Something worth fighting for." It wasn't until the final blow to Fraser's campaign came that they allowed themselves to breathe. A whistleblower from within Fraser's organization came forward with damning evidence of his illegal activities. The authorities moved swiftly, freezing his assets and launching a full-scale investigation. When the news broke, Oliver called an emergency meeting with the board to deliver the update. As he spoke, his voice steady and commanding, Charlie felt a swell of pride. This was the man she had fallen for, resilient, driven, and unrelenting in his pursuit of justice. When the meeting ended, Oliver turned to her, his expression softer than she'd ever seen it. "It's over," he said. "Is it?" Charlie asked, a trace of skepticism in her voice. "It is," Oliver said, stepping closer. "And now, we can finally move forward." She searched his face, her heart pounding. "What does moving forward look like for us?" He smiled, reaching for her hand. "Whatever we want it to be." The weeks that followed marked a new chapter for both of them. Knight Enterprises began to rebuild, its foundation stronger than ever. Charlie officially became part of Oliver's leadership team, her sharp mind and unwavering dedication earning the respect of even the most skeptical board members. As for their relationship, it flourished quietly but undeniably, built on trust forged in the fire of adversity. On a quiet evening months later, as they sat together in Oliver's penthouse overlooking the city, Charlie leaned her head against his shoulder. "Do you ever think about how this all started?" she asked. "Every day," Oliver said, pressing a kiss to her hair. "And are you glad it did?" He pulled her closer, his voice steady and sure. "More than anything." Charlie smiled, her heart full. For the first time in what felt like forever, the future seemed bright, and they were ready to face it together.